Don't lie.
It's true. Mama didn't leave you anything yet.
All the evidence is here.
Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for being here, and God bless you.
Walter did not shout. That was never his way. He stood beside Pastor Henry Bell with one hand over his heart, looking like a man carrying a burden for the whole family. "Dorothy has been through a great deal," he said softly. "We all know grief can make memories unreliable." The church went still. Dorothy stood in the center aisle with the old deed copy in her purse. She could feel the envelope pressing against her side like a hot coal. Walter looked at the congregation, then at her. "Our mother was a loving woman," he said. "But my sister has begun accusing her own brothers of theft. She is saying things about rent checks, old widows, and a house that Mama never promised her." Earl sat in the second pew, twisting his brown hat in both hands. He would not look up. Mrs. Clara Jenkins pressed her cane against the floor. Her lavender hat trembled just a little. Dorothy wanted to speak, but her throat closed. The smell of furniture polish, old hymnals, and Sunday perfume filled the air. Somewhere in the back, a paper fan snapped open. Walter smiled, that smooth banker smile. "I ask you all to pray for Dorothy," he said. "Pray she finds peace before greed takes what grief has not." That word landed hard. Greed. Dorothy had changed Ruth's sheets. Dorothy had rubbed her mother's knees with liniment. Dorothy had sat through long Savannah nights while the ceiling fan clicked and Ruth whispered old hymns in her sleep. And now Walter had turned love into greed. Pastor Bell stepped forward, but Walter had already done what he came to do. The whole church was looking at Dorothy like she had brought dirt onto holy ground. But one person in that room knew Walter had gone too far. And before the day ended, that person would point Dorothy toward a cabinet nobody had opened in years. Dorothy almost went home. She made it as far as the side door, where the heat wrapped around her like a wet blanket. Outside, Spanish moss hung from the live oaks, and traffic hummed faintly along Bull Street. Her hand touched the brass door handle. Then Pastor Henry Bell said her name. Not loud, just enough. "Sister Dorothy!" She turned. The pastor stood beside Mrs. Clara Jenkins. Clara's cane tapped twice on the tile. "Your mama used to keep things in the choir room," Clara said. "Things she did not trust to the office." Dorothy blinked. The choir room smelled of old paper, dust, and peppermint candies left in purses too long. Choir robes hung in clear plastic. A cracked mirror leaned above a narrow table. On the wall, a yellowed photograph showed Ruth Sullivan in 1969, wearing her church hat and standing beside a younger Pastor Bell. Dorothy knelt in front of the cabinet. The wood stuck from years of swelling and savanna humidity. Pastor Bell pulled once. Nothing. Clara gave him a look. "Henry, don't be gentle with the lie," she said. He pulled harder. The cabinet door cracked open. Inside were old attendance books, choir programs, offering envelopes, and a small shoebox tied with blue ribbon. Dorothy reached for it slowly. Her name was written on top. Not Dorothy, Dottie. Only Ruth had called her that. Dorothy lifted the lid. Inside was a cassette tape. The label had faded, but the words were still clear. "For Dottie when Walter starts talking." Dorothy sat back on her heels. The room seemed to tilt. Pastor Bell covered his mouth. Clara whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Dorothy had not heard her mother's voice since the funeral home closed the casket. Now Ruth had left a message from the grave. But why had she hidden it in the choir room? And what had Ruth known Walter would say? The cassette player came from Pastor Bell's office. It was black, scratched, and old enough to remember prayer meetings before cell phones. He set it on the choir room table and plugged it in. Dorothy sat with both hands folded. She did not know if she was ready, but she pressed play anyway. The tape hissed. Then Ruth Sullivan's voice filled the room. Weak, tired, but clear. "Dottie, baby, if you are hearing this, then Walter has done what I feared." Dorothy covered her mouth. Ruth coughed on the tape. In the background, a ceiling fan clicked. Somewhere far away, a train horn blew through Savannah night. "I signed that house to you," Ruth said. "Not because I loved your brothers less. Because you stayed. Because you kept the porch swept, the medicine sorted, and my heart from breaking." Dorothy bent forward as if the words had touched her shoulder. Ruth went on. "Walter told me he was collecting rent for the widows and putting it aside. I found the bank slips. I found the missing money." Earl knew enough to be scared, but Walter knew enough to be guilty. Earl made a sound from the doorway. Dorothy turned. He was standing there, pale and shaking, hat crushed in his hands. Behind Earl, another shadow crossed the hall. Walter! Ruth's voice kept playing. "The real codicil is not at the courthouse anymore. Walter took it before I died, but he did not find the copy under the sanctuary floor. And he never knew I made this tape." Dorothy rose slowly. Walter stepped into the doorway, his smile gone. For the first time, he looked old. Then Ruth said the last words on the tape. "Pastor Bell, if Walter is standing there when this plays, lock the church office and call Judge Whitmore." Walter reached for the cassette player. And Dorothy finally shouted, "Do not touch my mother's voice!" That was the moment Dorothy stopped asking for permission to be believed. She had the deed copy, she had the missing rent trail, and now she had Ruth Sullivan's own voice naming Walter's secret. But Walter had heard the same tape, and a man who steals for 30 years does not surrender because the truth asks nicely. If this part held your heart, take a moment to like, subscribe, and stay with Dorothy into the final chapter of this story. Because in Part 5, the church office door closes, the judge is called, and Walter brings out one last paper he believes can destroy Dorothy forever. But what he does not know is simple. Ruth left one more witness.